My sister used me as a punching bag, then cried to everyone that she was protecting me from bullies. No one believed my bruises came from her. The first time my sister Megan hit me hard enough to leave a bruise, I was 9 years old and she was 13. We were arguing over the television remote, a typical sibling disagreement that should have ended with one of us compromising or our parents intervening to resolve the conflict. Instead, it ended with Megan's fist connecting with my ribs hard enough to knock the wind out of me and leave a purple mark that lasted for 2 weeks. "If you tell Mom and Dad I hit you, I'll tell them you've been stealing money from Mom's purse," Megan threatened as I sat on the living room floor, gasping for breath and holding my side. "They'll believe me because I'm older and more responsible. I hadn't been stealing money from Mom's purse, but Megan's threat carried enough weight to keep me quiet about what had really happened." At 9, I was already learning that my older sister was willing to lie, manipulate, and use violence to get what she wanted, and that her position as the good kid in our family gave her credibility that I couldn't challenge. "What happened to your side?" Mom asked that evening when she noticed me wincing as I got dressed for bed. "I fell off my bike," I lied, glancing nervously at Megan, who was watching our interaction with the satisfied expression of someone whose threats had achieved their intended effect. "You need to be more careful, honey," Mom said, examining the bruise with concern but no suspicion about its actual cause. "Maybe we should get you a helmet and some protective gear if you're going to keep having accidents." That bruise was the beginning of a pattern that would define my relationship with Megan for the next 6 years. She would attack me when we were alone, threaten me to ensure my silence, then present herself to our parents and extended family as my devoted protector who was constantly worried about my safety and well-being. "I'm so concerned about Alex," she would tell our parents with tears in her eyes and genuine-sounding distress. "The kids at school are picking on him, and I try to protect him, but I can't be there all the time. I'm worried he's going to get seriously hurt." The performance was masterful and completely convincing. Megan would describe fictional bullying incidents with vivid detail, express authentic-seeming anxiety about my welfare, and position herself as the loving older sister who was doing everything possible to shield me from harm. Meanwhile, the real harm was coming from her, delivered through punches, kicks, slaps, and psychological abuse that escalated in frequency and severity as we got older. "Your sister loves you so much," our mother would say after one of Megan's tearful reports about my supposed bullying problems. "She comes to us crying about how worried she is about you. We're so lucky that you have someone who cares about you that much." But Megan's care manifested as violence that seemed designed to release her frustrations and establish dominance over someone smaller and more vulnerable than herself. She would hit me when she was angry about school, when she was frustrated with our parents, when she was bored and looking for entertainment, or when she simply felt like exercising power over someone who couldn't fight back effectively. "You're so weak and pathetic," she would hiss while pinching, slapping, or punching me during her attacks. "No wonder everyone at school picks on you. You can't even defend yourself against your own sister." The psychological component of her abuse was as damaging as the physical violence. Megan would tell me that I deserved to be hurt because I was annoying, stupid, or somehow defective. She convinced me that the bullying she described to our parents was real and that I was such a natural victim that everyone could see my weakness and vulnerability. "The reason kids pick on you is because you act like a victim," she would explain after beating me up in the basement while our parents were at work. "You have this pathetic energy that makes people want to hurt you. Even I can't help myself sometimes." By the time I was 11 and Megan was 15, the violence had become a regular feature of our daily interactions. She would find excuses to hurt me several times a week, always when we were alone and always followed by threats about what would happen if I told anyone the truth about my injuries. "Mom and Dad will never believe you anyway," she would remind me as I nursed bruised ribs, black eyes, or swollen lips. "Everyone knows I love you and would never hurt you. They'll think you're lying to get me in trouble, and then you'll be in trouble for making false accusations." She was probably right. Megan had cultivated such a convincing image as my devoted protector that any attempt to contradict that narrative would have seemed like either delusion or malicious lying. Our parents praised her regularly for being such a caring older sister, relatives commented on how lucky I was to have someone who looked out for me, and teachers at school knew her as the student who was constantly worried about her younger brother's welfare. Megan came to see me again today, my 5th grade teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, told my mother during a parent conference. "She's so concerned about Alex being bullied that she wanted to know if there was anything the school could do to protect him. It's wonderful to see such a caring relationship between siblings." The irony was devastating. While Mrs. Rodriguez was praising Megan for her apparent concern about my safety, The bruises on my arms and back were healing from her most recent attack, delivered because I'd asked to use the computer when she wanted to use it for homework. "I worry about you all the time," Megan would tell our parents with tears in her eyes, usually shortly after she'd given me new injuries to hide. "Alex tries to act tough, but I can see how much the bullying is affecting him. I wish I could do more to protect him." "You're such a good sister," Mom would reply, hugging Megan while I sat nearby with fresh bruises that everyone attributed to the fictional bullies that Megan described so convincingly. "Alex is lucky to have someone who cares about him so much." The gaslighting was so complete and systematic that I began to question my own understanding of reality. Maybe the kids at school really were bullying me and I just couldn't remember it clearly. Maybe Megan's violence was somehow justified or normal. Maybe I really was the weak, pathetic victim she told me I was, and her abuse was just reflecting something defective about my character. "Why do you think the other kids pick on you?" our school counselor, Mr. Thompson, asked during a session that had been arranged because of Megan's reports about my supposed bullying problems. "I don't know," I said honestly, because I genuinely didn't understand what bullying Megan was talking about. "I don't really have problems with other kids at school. Sometimes victims of bullying minimize their experiences or block out traumatic memories," Mr. Thompson explained, interpreting my confusion as denial rather than honesty. "Your sister is very concerned about you, and she's described some serious incidents that suggest you're being targeted by aggressive classmates." "I don't remember anything like that happening." "That's not unusual. Trauma can affect memory in complex ways. What's important is that you have a support system at home, and your sister is clearly committed to protecting you." The conversation left me feeling more confused and isolated than ever. Even the professional counselor believed Megan's version of events over my own lived experience, reinforcing the message that my perceptions weren't reliable and that my sister's concern for my welfare was more credible than my reports of my own life. The physical abuse escalated during Megan's junior year of high school, when academic pressure, social stress, and typical teenage emotional intensity seemed to amplify her need to control and hurt someone more vulnerable than herself. She began hitting me harder, more frequently, and with less provocation than ever before. "You looked at me wrong," became sufficient justification for a beating that left me with bruised ribs. "You're breathing too loudly," was enough reason for her to slap me across the face hard enough to leave handprint marks. "You exist," seemed to be her underlying rationale for the escalating violence that dominated our interactions. "I'm so worried about Alex," she sobbed to our parents after a particularly brutal attack that had left me with a black eye and swollen cheek. "The bullying at school is getting worse, and I think they're targeting him because they know I can't always be there to protect him. Maybe we should consider switching schools," Dad suggested, examining my injuries with concern and anger directed at the fictional bullies rather than the real perpetrator sitting across from him. "If the administration can't protect Alex from this level of violence, we need to find a school that can." "I don't want to switch schools," I said desperately, knowing that changing schools wouldn't solve the problem since the real source of my injuries would follow me wherever I went. "Honey, your safety is more important than staying at the same school," Mom replied gently. "If kids are hurting you this badly, we need to do something more drastic to protect you." "But I'm not being hurt at school," I tried to explain, though I could see in their expressions that they interpreted my protests as either fear of retaliation or misguided loyalty to a school that was failing to protect me. "Alex doesn't want to admit how bad the bullying is because he's ashamed," Megan said with the perfect combination of concern and understanding. "He thinks it makes him look weak to need protection, so he minimizes what's happening to him." The performance was so convincing that even I almost believed it. Megan's tears seemed genuine, her concern appeared authentic, and her explanations for my reluctance to discuss the bullying sounded psychologically plausible to adults who had no reason to suspect that she was the actual source of my injuries. The breaking point came during the spring of my 7th grade year, when Megan's violence reached a level that couldn't be hidden or explained away as the result of schoolyard bullying. She'd beaten me so severely during one of her rages that I ended up with cracked ribs, a concussion, and injuries that required emergency medical attention. "What happened to you?" the emergency room doctor asked as she examined the extent of my injuries, her expression growing more concerned as she documented bruises, cuts, and fractures that painted a picture of serious physical assault. "I got in a fight at school," I said, sticking to the story that Megan had coached me to tell during the drive to the hospital. "Some older kids cornered me after class. This level of injury suggests a very serious assault," Dr. Sarah Martinez observed, studying the X-rays that showed my cracked ribs and the CT scan that had revealed my concussion. "How many attackers were involved in this incident?" "I'm not sure," I replied, trying to sound confused and traumatized rather than deliberately evasive. Everything happened really fast. I'm going to need to report this to the police and to the school administration, Dr. Martinez told my parents. Assault resulting in these kinds of injuries is a serious crime, and the perpetrators need to be identified and prosecuted. The police investigation that followed my emergency room visit was the most terrifying and confusing experience of my 13-year-old life. Detectives interviewed me multiple times about the alleged assault, asking detailed questions about my attackers, the location of the incident, and the sequence of events that had led to my injuries. Can you describe the students who attacked you? Detective Lisa Park asked during one of our interviews at the police station. Physical descriptions, names if you know them, anything that might help us identify the perpetrators? I don't really remember clearly, I said, which was true in the sense that I was trying not to remember Megan's latest attack. Everything happened so fast, and I was scared. That's understandable, Detective Park replied sympathetically. Trauma can affect memory, especially in cases involving serious assault. But these injuries are consistent with a prolonged attack by multiple perpetrators. You were beaten very severely. The investigation expanded to include interviews with school administrators, teachers, and other students who might have witnessed the alleged assault or had information about ongoing bullying problems. What they discovered was that no one at school had any knowledge of serious bullying involving me, and there was no evidence that any assault had taken place on school property. We've interviewed over 30 students and staff members, Detective Park told my parents during a follow-up meeting. No one has any information about Alex being bullied or assaulted at school. In fact, most people describe him as well-liked and not involved in any conflicts with other students. But someone clearly attacked him, my father insisted, gesturing toward my still healing injuries. These injuries didn't happen by accident. You're absolutely right that these injuries are the result of deliberate assault, Detective Park agreed. But the assault didn't happen at school, and it doesn't appear to be connected to bullying by classmates. Then what are you suggesting happened? My mother asked, though I could see growing awareness and concern in her expression. I'm suggesting that we need to look more carefully at Alex's home environment and family relationships, Detective Park said gently. In cases where children have serious unexplained injuries and where their accounts of how those injuries occurred don't match the physical evidence, we often find that the abuse is coming from someone close to the victim. The suggestion that I might be experiencing abuse at home seemed to shock my parents, but I could see Megan's face go pale as she realized that her carefully constructed narrative was beginning to unravel under professional scrutiny. There's no abuse in our home, my mother said firmly. We're a loving family, and Alex's sister Megan is constantly worried about his safety. She's the one who's been trying to protect him from the bullying at school. Mrs. Sullivan, I'd like to speak with Alex privately, Detective Park said. Sometimes children are more comfortable discussing sensitive topics when family members aren't present. The private interview was my first opportunity to tell the truth about what had been happening to me, but I was terrified of the consequences of contradicting the story that had been established and reinforced for years. Megan's threats about what would happen if I ever told the truth echoed in my mind, along with her predictions that no one would believe me anyway. Alex, I want you to know that this is a safe space where you can tell me anything that's been happening to you, Detective Park said gently. Sometimes children are afraid to tell adults when someone is hurting them, especially if that person has threatened them or convinced them that no one will believe their story. I already told you what happened, I said quietly. I got beat up at school. I understand that's the story you've been telling, but the evidence doesn't support that explanation, Detective Park replied. The injuries you sustained are consistent with domestic abuse, not with a schoolyard fight. Someone close to you has been hurting you regularly, and I need to know who that person is. Nobody at home hurts me, I lied, though my voice was shaking with the effort of maintaining the deception. Alex, I've seen many cases like this, and I know how scary it can be to tell the truth when someone has been threatening you or manipulating you into protecting them, Detective Park said. But you don't have to protect someone who's been hurting you. That's my job now. The kindness in her voice almost broke my resolve, but the fear of Megan's retaliation and the certainty that my family would never believe me over her kept me silent about the truth. Can you think of any reason why someone might want to hurt you? Detective Park asked, trying a different approach. Anyone who's been angry with you, jealous of you, or who seems to enjoy causing you pain. The description fit Megan perfectly, but admitting that would mean destroying the family dynamics that had defined my entire life and challenging a narrative that everyone I loved had accepted as truth. No, I whispered, I can't think of anyone like that. Detective Park continued the interview for another 30 minutes, asking questions that seemed designed to help me feel safe enough to reveal the truth about my abuse. But the psychological control that Megan had established over me was too strong, and the fear of consequences was too overwhelming for me to break my silence. The investigation eventually stalled due to lack of evidence and my unwillingness to identify my real attacker. The police concluded that I'd been assaulted by unknown perpetrators in an incident that couldn't be fully investigated without additional information or witness cooperation. This case will remain open, Detective Park told my parents as the active investigation was suspended. If Alex remembers additional details about what happened to him, or if there are any similar incidents in the future, we'll revisit our investigation with new information. After the police investigation ended, Megan's abuse actually intensified, as if she was punishing me for the scrutiny that my injuries had attracted. She was more careful about where she hit me, focusing on areas that would be covered by clothing, but the violence was more frequent and more vicious than ever before. "You almost got me in trouble," she hissed during one of her attacks, punctuating her words with kicks to my stomach and back. "If you ever let them get that close to the truth again, I'll make sure you regret it for the rest of your life." "I didn't tell them anything," I gasped, curled up on the floor of her bedroom where she'd cornered me. "I never said it was you. But you almost did. I could see it in your face during their interviews. You wanted to tell them, didn't you?" "No, I would never." "Yes, you would," she interrupted, delivering another kick that made me cry out in pain. "You're weak and disloyal, just like I've always said. But I'm going to make sure you never forget who's really in charge here." The beating that followed was the worst I'd ever experienced, leaving me with injuries that took weeks to heal and psychological trauma that would affect me for years afterward. But perhaps even more damaging was Megan's renewed campaign to portray herself as my protector and advocate in the aftermath of the police investigation. "I'm so worried about Alex," she told our extended family during a gathering at our grandparents' house. "The police investigation was really hard on him, and I think he's blaming himself for not being able to identify his attackers. I try to reassure him that it's not his fault, but he's been so withdrawn and anxious since it happened." "Poor baby," our grandmother said, looking at me with sympathy and concern. "It must be so traumatic to be hurt that badly and not even be able to help the police catch the people who did it." "Megan's been amazing through all of this," our grandfather added. "She's been by Alex's side every step of the way, trying to help him heal and move forward. You're lucky to have such a devoted sister." The praise for Megan's supposed devotion felt like salt in wounds that were still healing from her latest attack. Everyone could see her performance as the caring sister, but no one could see the bruises hidden under my clothes or understand that she was both the cause of my trauma and the person claiming credit for helping me recover from it. "I just want Alex to feel safe and loved," Megan said with tears in her eyes, putting her arm around my shoulders in a gesture that looked affectionate but felt possessive and threatening. "He's been through so much, and all I want is for him to know that his family will always protect him." The physical contact made my skin crawl, but I couldn't pull away without seeming ungrateful for her apparent affection. Megan had trained me so thoroughly to accept her abuse while she performed concern for others that I'd lost the ability to distinguish between genuine care and manipulative performance. The pattern continued through my 8th grade year and into high school, with Megan's violence escalating during stressful periods and her performance as my protector becoming more elaborate and convincing over time. She began documenting her supposed efforts to help me, keeping a journal of fictional bullying incidents and her responses to them, which she showed to our parents as evidence of her dedication to my welfare. "Look at all the times Megan has tried to intervene on your behalf," Mom said, showing me pages of Megan's journal that detailed imaginary confrontations with fictional bullies. "She's been fighting for you even when you didn't know it was happening." Reading the journal was surreal and disturbing. Megan had created an elaborate fictional narrative in which she was constantly defending me from attackers who existed only in her imagination, while in reality, she was the primary source of violence and trauma in my life. "I had no idea you were doing so much to protect Alex," Dad told Megan after reading her journal. "We're so proud of you for looking out for your brother, even when it's difficult and thankless work." "I love Alex more than anything," Megan replied with the same tearful sincerity she'd perfected over the years. "I would do anything to keep him safe, even if he doesn't always appreciate it." The journal became part of the family mythology about Megan's devotion to my well-being, cited as evidence whenever anyone questioned why I seemed so withdrawn or anxious despite having such a loving and protective older sister. The breaking point finally came during my sophomore year of high school, when a teacher noticed the pattern of injuries I'd been hiding and reported suspected abuse to Child Protective Services. Unlike the police investigation, which had focused on finding unknown external perpetrators, The CPS investigation was specifically designed to identify abuse within the family system. Alex, we need to talk about what's been happening to you at home, the CPS investigator, Maria Santos, said during a private interview at school. You've had a pattern of injuries over the past several years that suggests ongoing abuse, and we need to identify the source of that abuse so we can protect you. Nothing's happening at home, I said automatically, though by this point my voice lacked conviction even to my own ears. Alex, I've reviewed your medical records, police reports, and school documentation going back 3 years, Maria said gently. The pattern of injuries you've sustained is consistent with regular physical abuse by someone in your household. I need you to help me understand who's been hurting you. My sister protects me, I said, repeating the narrative that had been reinforced for so many years. She's always trying to keep me safe. Tell me about your relationship with your sister, Maria said, her tone suggesting that she already suspected where the conversation was heading. For the first time in 6 years, I found myself in a conversation with an adult who seemed genuinely interested in understanding the dynamics of my relationship with Megan rather than simply accepting the surface narrative that she'd constructed. She loves me, I said, though the words felt hollow and automatic. What does that love look like day to day? Maria asked. How does your sister show you that she cares about you? The question forced me to examine the reality of my interactions with Megan rather than the story about those interactions that had been told to everyone else. When I tried to identify specific examples of her love and care, I realized that I couldn't think of any that weren't performances for other people's benefit. She worries about me, I said finally, though even as I said it, I was beginning to understand that her supposed worry was actually just the cover story for her abuse. Alex, Maria said quietly, I think your sister has been hurting you for a long time, and I think she's convinced you and your family that she's protecting you when she's actually the one you need protection from. The simple statement broke through years of psychological conditioning and gaslighting in a way that no previous conversation had managed to do. For the first time, an adult was articulating what I'd known but been unable to say. That Megan was my abuser, not my protector. Yes, I whispered, and with that single word, I finally began telling the truth about what my life had really been like for the past 6 years. The revelation that Megan had been abusing me while convincing everyone that she was protecting me sent shockwaves through our family and extended community. The people who had praised her as a devoted sister had to confront the reality that they'd been witnessing and celebrating an elaborate performance designed to cover up years of systematic abuse. I don't understand how this could have happened, my mother said during one of the family counseling sessions that CPS required. Megan seemed so concerned about Alex's welfare. She was constantly worried about him being bullied. The bullying she described was projection of her own behavior onto fictional perpetrators, the family therapist, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, explained. She was able to perform concern convincingly because she knew exactly what kinds of harm Alex was experiencing. She was causing that harm herself. But why would she do that? Why would she hurt Alex and then pretend to protect him? The performance gave her power and control over the narrative of Alex's life while also ensuring that she received praise and attention for being a caring sister, Dr. Walsh replied. It was a very sophisticated form of manipulation that allowed her to abuse Alex with impunity while positioning herself as the hero of his story. Megan's response to being exposed was to maintain her innocence while portraying herself as the victim of false accusations. She claimed that I was lying about her abuse because I was jealous of the attention she received for protecting me, and that the real problem was my resentment of her genuine care and concern. I've done nothing but love and protect Alex for years, she told our parents with the same tearful sincerity she'd always used. Now he's trying to destroy me with lies because he can't appreciate what I've sacrificed for him. But the evidence of her abuse was overwhelming once investigators knew where to look. Medical records showed a pattern of injuries that coincided with times when we were alone together. School records documented her reports of fictional bullying incidents that never matched my actual experiences, and psychological evaluation revealed the extent of trauma and conditioning that I'd experienced as a result of her manipulation. Alex has been systematically abused and gaslighted for approximately 6 years, Dr. Walsh concluded in her assessment. The perpetrator created an elaborate false narrative that protected her from accountability while ensuring continued access to her victim. The family court ultimately placed Megan in a residential treatment facility for adolescents with serious behavioral disorders, while I remained at home with additional support services and ongoing therapy to address the psychological damage from years of abuse and manipulation. The hardest part isn't the physical violence, I told Dr. Walsh during one of our sessions. It's learning to trust my own perceptions again after being told for so long that my reality wasn't accurate. Gaslighting is one of the most damaging forms of psychological abuse because it attacks the victim's ability to understand their own experiences, Dr. Walsh explained. Recovery involves rebuilding your confidence in your own judgment and learning to distinguish between genuine care and manipulative performance. Today, 5 years later, I've learned to recognize the difference between real protection and fake concern, between genuine love and controlling manipulation. Megan and I have no relationship. She completed her treatment program but has never acknowledged the abuse or taken responsibility for the harm she caused. Some abusers are never able to move beyond the narratives they've created to justify their behavior, Dr. Walsh explained when I expressed disappointment about Megan's continued denial. Your healing doesn't depend on her acknowledgement of what she did to you. It depends on your ability to understand and process your own experiences. The scars from Megan's abuse, both physical and psychological, are permanent, but they no longer define my understanding of myself or my relationships with others. I've learned that real protection looks like respect for boundaries, genuine concern manifests as listening rather than controlling, and authentic love doesn't require elaborate performances or public demonstrations. Most importantly, I've learned to trust the evidence of my own experience over other people's interpretations of my life, and to recognize that sometimes the people who claim to be protecting you are actually the ones you most need protection from.